The content warning this evening, I'm going to be speaking about sexual abuse. It's out there, and it's going to get you. You have no control over it. It will take over your life, and you will love every second of it. That which I am talking about is USY. This was the first line of a speech that I gave over 2 decades ago when I ran for United Synagogue Youth President. I meant every word. The Jewish youth group of the conservative movement was my entire high school experience. In a pre-social media world where Zoom, FaceTime, and video conferencing was reserved for sci-fi futuristic adventures, I lived from convention to convention, from Shabbaton to Shabbaton. I waited months to see my closest friends who lived hours away, waited months for those 72 hours of a weekend utopia where we all felt safe to come as we were, accessing that sacred community, a community that we created together. Some came from small Jewish communities in different pockets of the state. But here in USY, we were no longer the token Jews of our high school. We didn't have to be afraid to express our Judaism proudly. It was a place where no matter one's popularity, no matter how they felt or whether they were part of the in crowd, they felt at home. USY was where I traveled across the country, where I first experienced shacharit at sunrise at the Grand Canyon, or led services overlooking a Virgin Mary statue in Butte, Montana. It's USY where I traveled to Israel and first climbed Masada, where we chanted the words of Eicha as we touched the cold Jerusalem stone of the Kotel. And it's because of USY that I became a rabbi. I know through private and personal conversations that USY and other Jewish youth groups had a profound impact on so many of you. In fact, many of you I even knew in USY. It's because of that impact of USY and our growing teen community that we hired our first full-time teen program coordinator, Talia Feldman, that you heard Cheryl speak about just a few moments ago, to work exclusively with our adolescent congregants to build meaningful relationships with them. Because we believe in the power of teen programming, we believe in the power of Jewish youth group. We understand that it's often a teenager's Jewish experiences that they have, not those in preschool or elementary school, but post-B'nai Mitzvah that shape them. When you're a teenager and you begin making decisions for yourselves, that makes or breaks who you are and who you become. It's those very experiences that made me who I am. And so, reflecting on news about USY over the past month, I am broken. Last month, a friend and colleague of mine, Rabbi Jordan Safer, was quoted in an article that subsequently made the rounds in media, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, and all over social media. He mentioned, like me, how much he loved USY and still does. He mentioned, like me, how much it meant to him in high school, how it shaped him. And then he mentioned how he tried contacting the organization for years to make complaints. And when those complaints went unanswered, he finally spoke out as a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of a longtime USY staff member. Rabbi Safer is one of dozens who have come forward in recent weeks to acknowledge that they too are survivors of sexual abuse, victims of the same predator who staffed USY functions for decades. I know many have personally reached out to me to share that they are survivors of that same abuse. And I weep. I weep for the victims, for their fear, for the sense of betrayal, for the hesitation that they had to come forward over these past decades. I weep for those who did come forward, and then such abuse was swept under the rug, not acknowledged, or tried to quote unquote be handled behind the scenes. And I weep that at times, USY turned a blind eye to such predatory acts of some, and at other times, actively dismissed these acts of wrongdoing. In a post-Me Too world, where so many brave souls have stood up and spoken out about their experiences of sexual abuse and assault, I can't help but wonder how USY and United Synagogue, how our sacred institutions continue to allow such predators to be hired time and time again. And I'm left wondering, when I was that 18-year-old youth leader, was I complicit, ignoring similar rumors, brushing them off about certain staff members? I remember when I was elected USY International President, a rabbi who is now a colleague pulled me aside and told me some of the most important advice that I've kept with me to this day. They said that the most important thing I can do is teach Torah. More than membership numbers or cool programming ideas USY would start, it was the Torah that you teach that stays with people. So here goes. In the middle of the book of Genesis, in Parshat Vayishlach, right in the middle of the story about Jacob's sons, we're introduced to his daughter Dinah. And in the Torah, we learn that Shechem, son of Hamor, sees Dinah and sexually assaults her, rapes her. Vayishkav ota v'yaneha. He lied with her oppressively, afflicting pain on her, weakening her. And 3 verses later, Jacob returns and is informed of the abuse and assault that his daughter was victim to. The Torah tells us that Jacob heard that his daughter was assaulted, v'charish Yaakov, and Jacob remains silent. Jacob's silence is deafening and disturbing. He's opting to ignore the abuse and assault of his daughter because it doesn't fit in with his narrative. But the truth is, it deeply defines him and deeply defines so many Jewish institutions who are part of Bnei Yisrael, descendants of him. Dr. Ellen Frankel acknowledges that Dinah is silent the entire Torah, never speaking a single word. And she equates her silence to her father's in that moment. When no one believed her, Dr. Frankel writes, when no one stood up for her, spoke up for her, she gave up on trying to speak up for herself. The same way Jacob refuses to speak up and stand up for his daughter, a victim of abuse, we too, the organized Jewish community, have failed to do so. At times, our organizations have refused to stand with victims, choosing to prop up predators because of influence or name recognition. Rabbi Sofer was clear that he wasn't interested in a lawsuit, he wasn't interested in monetary damages. He was just looking for a public reckoning for USY. He wanted to understand how an organization could continue to employ an alleged abuser and allow them to have access to its adolescent members. And then, years after explicitly being notified of these allegations, have that individual continue to work at a United Synagogue affiliated congregation. He wanted to understand how and why an institution could remain silent like Jacob. You see, we call ourselves B'nai Yisrael, we prop him up, but Jacob is quite cowardly. This is the same biblical character that when he thought his brother was bringing an army to seek revenge on him, he sent his concubines and their children, those in his family that he seemed to love least, to the front lines. He was silent when his daughter was raped. And chapters later, we find that one of his many wives, Bilhah, was raped and assaulted as well. And the Torah tells us that he hears what happens, but nothing else. There's no immediate reaction. This silence is not unique to USY, and it's not unique to Jewish institutions. It's plagued other faith groups, most notably the Vatican. It's plagued other organizations like Boy Scouts of America. But we must confront how our institutions have been far too silent. It may be out of fear of turning those away who put trust in these institutions. But silence doesn't comfort us. We can't put trust in that silence. It's dysfunctional and counterproductive. And it only ends up doing further damage to the victims of such abusive behavior and to our institutions as a whole. We say this evening, Al Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha. We have sinned against you in our silence. On this holiest of days, we acknowledge our mistakes. So let us say it here that we as an organized Jewish community have failed at times to keep our children, our adolescents, and our adult members safe. And we, the collective we, have all too often chosen the path of silent complacency. It should not be up to the bravery and courage of survivors to come forward. It should be up to us to protect them. In the Unatana Tokef prayer that we say on these high holy days, we say that a great shofar will be sounded and a still small voice heard. This is initially meant to be a theological statement, that we must look for God in the silence, but I believe it's an ethical one as well. We must speak up and stand up so that we don't have to depend on victims to do so. And when they are brave enough to do so, we believe them. Tshuva is hard work. We're taught that during these days of awe, prior to doing tshuva, we begin with cheshbon hanefesh, an accounting of our souls that does not merely promise to be better in the future, but acknowledges the transgressions of the past and asks for forgiveness. We must do this not just as individuals, but as a collective community. May that introspection call on all of our organizations, especially those institutions that we depend on to shape our souls and guide us on our Jewish journeys, to do tshuva. Because I want to believe in these organizations. They shaped me. They shaped so many of us. I want them to shape our children. But in order to do that, we, the Jewish community, must do tshuva. So we ask forgiveness for our unknowing silence and commit to elevate the souls of those harmed and wronged. Prior to reciting the words of the Kol Nidre that Rabbi Creditor just chanted, we recite 3 times, in fact, to ensure the prominence of these words. By the authority of the heavenly court on high and the earthly court below, with consent of God the Holy One and consent of community, we acknowledge that power and authority that we have as community to make a difference. We begin Yom Kippur not just by turning to God and asking God for forgiveness. We turn to each other, and we understand and acknowledge that we have the power to make change, to right wrongs, and to hold those who have done wrong accountable. Even when we pour our hearts out to God, we don't expect God to be the one to make the necessary changes to build a safe community. We must do that. The yeshiva shel mata, as our liturgy says. The court of public opinion does that. We must be the voices to ensure that our youth groups, our camps, our schools, our synagogues, our institutions are safe. And then, only then, can they truly be sacred. So may we do the necessary work this year. The Yeshiva Shel Mala and Yeshiva Shel Mata, God and community alike, to build a Kehila Kedosha, a sacred and safe community for everyone. Amen.